Britain, then, was slower to create and develop a police force than the rest of Europe. France had one long before. Indeed, the word police is taken from the French. This fact was not unimportant, as the very idea of a police force was seen as foreign, that is, French, and particularly undesirable, and was generally regarded as a form of oppression. To understand the past, you have to be able, as far as possible, to think as the people in the period you are studying thought. The example of what it must have been like to be a peasant in the Middle Ages issued. However, sensibilities change over time, and we can't completely throw off the mentality of the present. Therefore, every age will have a slightly different perspective on the same period of the past, no matter what the facts are. We have outfitted it with a space lab built by our European partners and used it before the era of the space station to do scientific research. We used it as part of our partnership with the Russians, which is still continuing, first as part of the Mir space station, where we actually prolonged the useful life of Mir by several years through logistical supply visits with the shuttle. And now, of course, we're using it to build the new International Space Station, which is a huge international partnership. The speaker reminisces about his views of the English Revolution when he was a student and how it seemed quite clear which side he was on: the aristocrats, not the Puritans. Later he realized there was more to it than that, and there were several ways of interpreting the revolution: as a struggle between the king and parliament, as a class war, or as an unpredictable situation without clear signs. By this time, however, paleontological momentum had moved to England. In 1812, at Lyme Regis on the Dorset coast, an extraordinary child named Mary Anning, aged 11, 12, or 13, depending on whose account you read, found a strange fossilized sea monster, 17 feet long and now known as the Ichthyosaurus, embedded in the steep and dangerous cliffs along the English Channel. The main difference on this occasion was that the colonists were not just fighting against a king who was determined to use his own prerogative, they were also fighting against a parliament which believed that it, and it alone, should raise taxes and control revenues, rights which had been won in the previous century. In the past, wars have led to inflation and higher commodity prices. Fighting disrupts trade and prevents raw materials from being shipped from one country to another. In Second World War Britain, a banana was the height of luxury. In the summer of 2006, Europe experienced drought on an unprecedented scale. On the Rhine, Europe's busiest waterway, low waters forced ships to carry less cargo and make up for lost revenue with surcharges of up to 50%. In Italy, the Agricultural Confederation announced that the grape harvest was the lowest in 2 decades. Before the time of Alexander the Great, the only Eastern people who could be compared with the Greeks in the fields of science and philosophy were from the Indian subcontinent. However, because so little is known about Indian chronology, it is difficult to tell how much of their science was original and how much was the result of Greek influence. In the second quarter of the 19th century, a rapidly growing middle class created a great demand for furniture production. Yet at this stage, while machines were used for certain jobs, such as carved decoration, there was no real mass production. The extra demand was met by numerous woodworkers. Mass production came later, and the quality of domestic furniture declined. Line engraving on metal, which, to a great extent, was a development of the goldsmith's craft of ornamenting armor and precious metals, did not emerge as a printmaking technique until well into the 151 8th century. Copper, the metal mainly used for engraving, was expensive, and engraving itself was laborious and took a long time. For the first 2 or 3 years after the Second World War, a new title would often sell out within a few months of publication. However, unless public demand for the book was unusually high, they were rarely able to reprint it. With paper stock strictly rationed, they could not afford to use a precious paper or tie up their limited capital with a reprint. Historically, the low level of political autonomy of the cities in China is partly a result of the early development of the state bureaucracy. The bureaucrats played a major role in the growth of urbanization, but were also able to control its subsequent development, and they never completely gave up this control. Early in the 19th century, Wordsworth opposed the coming of the steam train to the Lake District, saying it would destroy its natural character. Meanwhile, Blake denounced the dark satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution. The conservation of the natural environment, however, did not become a major theme in politics until quite recently. In the distribution of wealth, America is more unequal than most European countries. The richest tenth of the population earns nearly 6 times more than the poorest tenth. In Germany and France, the ratio is just over 3 to 1. The United States also has the largest proportion of its people in long-term poverty. Chaucer was probably the first English writer to see the English nation as a unity. This is the reason for his great appeal to his contemporaries. A long war with France had produced a wave of patriotism, with people no longer seeing each other as Saxon or Norman but as English. The grid-based infrastructure enables large-scale scientific applications to be run on distributed resources and coupled in innovative ways. However, in practice, grid resources are not very easy to use for the end users, who have to learn how to generate security credentials. There is an imminent need to provide transparent access to these resources so that the end users are shielded from the complicated details. IT may well change the way you live, yet again. Welcome to the world mobile commerce, where your handheld device, it a mobile phone, a personal digital assistant, PDA, or any other wireless application will soon be used for commercial transactions. Skeptical? Consider these facts in Japan. Mobile phones are used for location-based services where the mobile service providers tie up with a host of other players such as restaurants, car rental companies, etc. When the mobile user enters that zone, messages from all these players are flashed on the mobile device. Location-based services are proved in several other countries as well. Electronic discourse is one form of interactive electronic communication. In this study, we reserve the term for the two-directional texts, in which one person using a keyboard writes language that appears on the sender's monitor and is transmitted to the monitor of a recipient, who responds by keyboard. As we progress into the 21st century, communications are becoming faster and faster. Think of millions of different media images you are bombarded with every day. It is as important now to be able to read and make sense of those images as it has been to be able to read ordinary text.